Hello, everybody out there. I'm Danielle, and this is No Violence for Kids Canada. Welcome to our YouTube channel. And this is a channel just to bring everybody together and urge for action to call to action number 6 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to end corporal punishment in Canada and other places around the world, it seems. I'm doing lots of interviews, and today I'm doing one from Connecticut in the United States. I think the last one was from Texas. If you look at my channel, you will see Ireland, you will see Australia. So it's been really fun to travel around the globe and get more information about corporal punishment and how kids are doing all over the world. I am here in the Kwantlen Nation, otherwise known as Surrey, BC. That's part of the Coast Salish territory and people. So just along the Pacific coast of near Vancouver, actually. And I believe in their truth, the Kwantlen Nation. I believe in all of their history and the elder stories that they're telling. And so as a mission of mine is to really work on reconciliation. And I do that by studying justice and also as an activist and co-founder of No Violence for Kids Canada. So let's get started. This channel is full of all kinds of interviews, and I've been interviewing my heroes. And in the way I look at that are those that are really working hard to make life more safe for kids and are willing to speak up about it. So it's one thing to do the work, but it's another thing to be a bit of an activist. So these are my heroes. And today I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Steve Tracy. We actually met through Twitter, through lots of retweeting, and it seemed like we had a lot of common ground. So we got talking, and wow, it really did turn out we had a lot in common. I am so thrilled. Dr. Steve Tracy is actually on the board of directors of the Glasser Institute. And this is kind of where it went, wow. Years ago, I was trained as an EA in a program called restitution. And it really changed my perspective on behavior. It was the foundation of me going, hey, behavior, it just blew me away. So you're going to learn more in a minute. And to know that like 25 years later, on Twitter of all things, here I am talking to Dr. Steve Tracy on the board of directors of the Glasser Institute, who does all of this amazing work around choice theory. So Dr. Steve Glasser went to Harvard. Wow. I saw that and I was like, that up here in Canada, we see that it's almost fiction. It's like, wow, that's a really cool story probably in itself. Master's of Education from Harvard University, was a school superintendent. It looks like of Connecticut. I don't know the states and all those little small areas and counties very well, but your resume is fantastic, Steve. And thank you so much for coming to talk to me today and talking about how choice theory could help maybe fill in the toolbox of reducing violent discipline.
Sure. Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate the invite. So where do you want to start?
Well, I'd love to hear more, but let's start with how you got into this choice theory or even working with kids.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for one thing, I'm a father of 3. They're all grown up and out of the house now, but that's the first way you start working with kids, whether you like it or not. And then I had a mentor when I was in college, a man by the name of Mark Shedd, who was the superintendent of schools in the town where I went to high school, and he later became the superintendent in Philadelphia. And he invited me down to serve as a summer intern there while I was in college, spent a couple of summers working in the school system. I had previously been interested in government, politics, law, things like that. But my experiences in the city school system really helped me to appreciate what an important political and social and community issue having quality public schools for all children was. So that kind of turned my head into the education arena. And that's where I've been ever since college. I've been a history teacher at the high school level and a superintendent of schools in several communities here in Connecticut. Not the whole state, just a couple of cities. Okay. But that's been my interest with students and public education in the States. With
like
respect,
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the intersection. You know, it seems like when I asked that question, it's a similar story about there's this interest in justice and law through folks that will have their interest around children education or parenting, whatever it might be, but there's an interest in justice and law. So that intersection is important.
Well, I remember years ago, back in my college days, talking with other people about what their interests were, and we got talking about education. And this other student, whose name I can't recall, said, "Well, it's very simple, Steve. Education is for freedom." And the more I thought about it, the more I thought he had a point. Freedom from ignorance, freedom from manipulation by others because you can't understand what's going on around you, freedom from poverty and the opportunity to, take care of your family and serve your community, all that stuff. Education is for freedom. And I really believe that's true. And that's why I think, at least in the States, we've had a commitment for a long, long time to the notion of publicly funded public education.
Yeah.
That all of us, whether we have children in the schools or not, have an interest in having an educated citizenry. And so we all support that, or we should, and we all pay for that, even though some of us don't have kids, some of us may have kids in private schools, etc. So it's been a very important part of my adult life, and I don't regret it. I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to work with parents, kids, communities, and so forth.
Yeah.
Your
energy to work with children, and I can just see it even through your tweets and talking to you. I can just, it's contagious. I want to learn more. I'm interested. I feel like I love what you're saying, the connected between freedom and education. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that intersection, again, it brings up a lot of controversy, right? So when we start talking about values like freedom and peace, and we start mixing a little politics and education and taxpayer money, it becomes just, we're right in the crux of, what people seem to care about and get really worked up about. What is choice theory? So bring me back, because I know it as restitution level 1 and 2. I think it was Diane Gosson's book, and it was super cool. We did these assessments we did ourselves, but we also did kids, where we do these assessments, and it would be like fun, freedom, belonging, security, and power were their basic needs. And we could find out do these assessments or observances, and we could see pretty much what was the underlying need behind the behavior. Then we could find some up and clean ways to meet those needs. And it was really effective.
Mm-hmm. Well, choice theory is a comprehensive psychological model. It's an attempt to explain as broadly as one can why people behave as they do, and how one person can influence the behavior of another. It was created over the course of a 50-year career by the late William Glasser. He was born in Cleveland, I think, in 1925, and is considered the father of choice theory. It basically, choice theory is what a psychologist would call an internal control psychological model, meaning the fundamental belief is that our behavior stems from within us, that we are each responsible for what we do in the world. It stands in contrast to external control behavior, which is the belief that our behavior is determined largely by outside forces, by what other people say or do to us, by the weather, by what goes on at our job, all kinds of outside forces. And along with that is the belief that I can control your behavior through the use of rewards, if I can, or punishments, if I must. I can make you do what I want you to do, whether I'm a father or mother or a teacher or a boss. External control theory says that that's the way the world works, that's the way you get people to do what they need to do, rewards and punishments. That is the predominant psychological assumption in the world today, even by people that have never studied psychology, and they would never use words like external control and internal control. But if you ask most people, how do you get someone to do something that they don't want to do? Very quickly, you'll be talking about rewards and punishments, incentives, extra pay. You're not going to get credit for the course. You're going to get suspended. You're going to get fired. All the things that go into, quote, making other people do things. Dr. Glasser's view is that is fundamentally incorrect, and that the attempt of people to control the lives of others is the source of most of the unhappiness in the world and most of the ineffective practice that goes on in organizations and schools and companies and so on. So, first and foremost, choice theory is an internal control psychological theory. Well, what does that mean? You mentioned a minute ago the five basic needs that Dr. Glasser taught about, that he believes are common to all human beings. And by the way, I've had a chance to share this message in West Africa and also in Central America, as well as in other places in the States. And it gains wide acceptance. People nod in agreement. They understand. And those five basic needs are: first, safety. It's not real. I shouldn't say first. It's not like a hierarchy, but certainly
Right.
a fundamental need. If we don't have that, it's hard to even continue the conversation. So safety. The second is love and belonging. The third is power, which means not my power over other people, but my capacity to do something that is important to me, that is recognized by others, and for which I am respected and appreciated. So whether it's my ability to write, my ability to sing, my ability to play in a sport, whatever that might be, the power to do something and to be respected and appreciated for it. So that's one. Then another is freedom, the opportunity to chart my own course in life, to be the person that I want to be, to do the things and associate with the people. And the last one is fun. That Dr. Glasser believed that fun and good humor was a fundamental human trait. So those are the five: safety, belonging, power, freedom, and fun. And we direct our behavior as best we can at any point in our lives towards satisfying one or more of those basic needs. Now, when I first encountered Dr. Glasser here in Connecticut back almost 30 years ago, and he was talking to a group of school leaders, and in fact, we had some of us were just reading his book, The Quality School. I'll hold that up for the folks out there. It's called The Quality School. And the subtitle, which I can't really see,
a companion volume to The Quality School.
This is The Quality School Teacher. The original book, The Quality School, the subtitle was Managing Students Without Coercion.
Yes.
So that attracted a lot of attention. We were all reading his book. So, hey, he's in Danbury. Let's go down and see him. So at one point early in his remarks, he said, I know a lot of you here are working in schools for poor children, disadvantaged communities, low income neighborhoods, whatever you want to call it. And he said that means that your work as educators is that much easier. And a hush fell over the room, and people were whispering to each other, no, he meant harder. Our job is harder because dad's not in the home. She didn't get any breakfast. He's never been to a museum. Our work is harder with poor kids. He said, no, that's not true. He said, if you believe, as I do, that all human behavior is inspired by those five basic needs: safety, love and belonging, power, freedom, and fun. If the kids you're working with are not getting enough of that where they live, but if they get it from you, that is the basis of a very powerful relationship through which you can challenge them to learn things and try things that they might never otherwise have attempted. So right then, and he said, so therefore, your job as an educator in working with these challenging populations is easier, but only if you understand. Meaning, only if you understand the truth about human behavior and why people, including kids, do what they do. So right then and there, I said, I need to understand this stuff. And I started reading his books and taking his training. And 28 years later, I'm on the board of his institute. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's, there's a lot more to it. There are all kinds of aspects. One of the things that I like about Dr. Glasser's work, and if you read any of his books, you will see that he goes into considerable detail. He even repeats dialogues that he has had with counseling clients or with educators. For example, every educator would say that I seek to have a positive relationship with my students. At least most would. I mean, there's probably some people who say relationships don't matter. I've got the information. I'm delivering it.
Power. Yeah.
But most people would say, yes, I would like to have a positive relationship with my students. But that's often the end of it. I mean, what does that mean? And there's more to having an effective teaching relationship than just being nice. So Dr. Glasser goes into detail. He's got This, for one thing, he believes that the only person whose behavior I can control is my own. It always starts with that. This is an internal control theory. So the question is not what do I need to make the kids do, but what do I need to do to set the stage for a positive relationship through which I can challenge and teach them. And so he has the what he calls the caring habits, which are things that we each can do to promote positive relationships, not just in the classroom, but in our families, in our workplace. And those are things like accepting, listening, respecting, trusting, supporting, negotiating differences. These are what Dr. Glasser calls the caring habits. So he's being specific. You do these things, and you've increased the likelihood of having a positive relationship with anybody, but in this case, with your students. Of course, there's the other list, the deadly habits. These are the things, if you would like to destroy your relationship with your spouse, with your coworkers, or with your students, then these are the things that you need to do: blaming, complaining, criticizing, nagging, threatening, punishing, and bribing or rewarding to control, as Dr. Glasser. Sadly, at least in American schools, those deadly habits are not uncommon. Whether it's you're suspended or you get an F or I'm calling your parents to tell them what a rotten kid you've been today. There's a lot of the deadly habits. And then we wonder why some kids don't want to come to school. We've created our own problem.
Yeah. I think this is great summary. It leads me into so many questions, but what came up for me a lot was I was thinking about all the different models, how when you said, when I was doing restitution, it was kind of the way we described it to kids. I don't know if it's in the book or not, or it was just kind of made up in our school, but we would say to the kids, there's ways you can behave in an up and clean way to get your needs met, your fun, freedom, belonging, power, in an up and clean way. So we would brainstorm different ways of doing that, or down and dirty. Right. So it was fun to kind of visualize what that meant. And I hear you talking about that kind of thing too, so you said, you didn't say up and clean though. I heard you say another
No,
thing.
I never heard the opposite of down and dirty. That's cool.
Yeah, it was the restitution. It was like on the wall, like for some kids. Yeah, it was really fun to talk about different ways, like bullying, for instance. There was ways to, bullying. Well, what is the down and dirty? What is the need that might be under there? And then what is the up and clean way to get that need met? So a lot of times it was actually fun.
Yeah.
So kids would make fun of each other. They'd get a laugh out of their team. These kids, they were bullies. They would get in all kinds of trouble. And then once we started talking to them and more about, discovery through the process of choice theory and all of the tools that were given to us, we discovered it was often fun. They just like the laugh. And like I was mentioning to you before, one little guy, it was like, well, why don't we set him up in the morning on the PA and tell a joke? And that was an up and clean way for him to find his fun. And it was like a totally different kid. It was amazing. And of course, we all got to laugh in the morning too. So that was an up and clean way, but a down and dirty way was to make fun of others.
Well, that's an excellent example of how a frame of mind that's informed by choice theory causes you to see children and their behavior differently, and causes you to respond to what we call misbehavior in a more productive way. And from a psychological point of view, one would say, well, there really is no such thing as misbehavior. 100%. There's only behavior. Absolutely. We call it misbehavior when we're in charge and we don't like it. But the child, based on Dr. Glasser's teaching, the child is seeking to satisfy those 5 basic needs. He's doing it in a way that we regard as inappropriate in a classroom setting, pushing other kids around or disrupting the class. But he has these 5 basic needs. Now, if you take an external control approach, your response might be, well, you're suspended. We're going to isolate you now. So that's our reaction. You can't come to school for so many days. What that actually does is interferes with, stifles the basic need for belonging, because now he's not part of the group. He's not having any fun. You've interrupted all of that in the interest of punishing him. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes you do need to separate kids from the group.
If very loud
other kids or insulting other kids or threatening. I need to put you out for the sake of protecting the rest of my class. But I should not confuse that suspension with solving the problem. That's first aid. That's emergency. Get out because you're behaving in a way that's threatening and unfair to others. But that's the easy part. I can suspend a kid in about 10 minutes. I've already got the letter on my computer, and I call his parents and I explain the behavior, and you're out. The hard part is, as you were implying before, get underneath that behavior. What basic need was that child trying to meet that resulted in the bullying or assaultive or inappropriate behavior? Now, a lot of folks who don't understand choice theory, or who take a more reward and punishment approach to their work with children, will say, "Oh, so you want to understand the bully? You think it's fine that he pushes other kids around? You think it's fine that he talks back?" No, that's not what I said. What I want to do is I want to teach this child how he or she can meet his basic needs, which they must do. It's like breathing. If I put my hand over your mouth, you're going to struggle. You're going to resist because you
Yeah.
have to breathe. If I deprive you of the basic needs of safety,
Yeah.
belonging, power, freedom, and fun, you're going to resist because you have to. So the trick here is to figure out, as you did with that young person, he apparently had a high need for fun, and he thought
Mm.
it was fun to make other people's lives miserable. Well, if you can show him a way that he can have fun and he can get recognition, it's not just fun, it's also power. Hey,
Oh,
Dad,
so
the kid
much
that tells the
power.
joke that makes us all laugh.
Yeah. And
We
our
had a
connection, right? So I think what's important to look at is when we look at sanctions, even in the world, right? This idea of punishment and sanctions and
yeah,
restrictions and seclusion and confinement and corporal punishment and all of these things doesn't end wars, right? It builds more of an industry around our thoughts, and it creates more opportunity for thinking that we have to separate each other and make people hurt and have revenge against us. So we have to feel bad to change. And with this theory, what I found was there's a softening of the relationship. And those kind of, you don't even think about doing those things. It's not reward at all. It's very curious. And
yeah.
it's fun because you engage the child in that curiosity. They get to know more about, instead of being that blaming and shaming, power over hierarchical person, you're now like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is really interesting and it's not okay. And so together we need to find a way to, what's going on here, because this has to stop. And I think
Well,
that's what is this is the part that I think people get confused with when you remove punishment and rewards, is that you become passive. And I think that what happens is you're prioritizing not the behavior, you're prioritizing the relationship and where we all fit together. And
well,
that
the
makes
first step toward doing that, either in a school or a family setting, uh, is to have a perspective about why the child might be doing what I don't want him or her to do, and that's where having a theoretical understanding is very important. Absent an understanding of an internal control theory like choice theory,
yeah.
people will default to what's most common, which is external control, rewards, and punishments. And when that doesn't work, we impose more punishments.
Yeah.
It's not like we say, "Well, this isn't working. Maybe we should look for something else." No, we're going to do it harder, and that's what often behind teachers will say. We need the administration to back us up, meaning when we want to punish the kids, you need to join in on that. We all need to punish them harshly until they, comply. Instead
Yeah.
of that, we need to understand the behavior. After, sometimes we have to remove the kids,
Mhm.
the reasons I explained.
Mhm.
But after that, we need to understand the behavior, because guess what? We're being paid to teach these youngsters and help them to develop. And just as important as it is to learn to read and write and understand our history, it's important for them to learn how to function in a socially acceptable way in a school or community setting. So we need to teach them. Another key ingredient here is for me not to take it personally. When a kid tells you to F off in front of 25 other teenagers, it's hard not to take it personally. But as soon as you take it personally, now I need to get even with this kid.
Yeah.
I need to show everybody else that's watching, as well as the kid himself, what happens to you when you speak like that to me. So now I've taken it personally. Now I'm focused on revenge rather
Yeah.
than taking it professionally and focusing on the unacceptable behavior and taking this kid aside and working on the relationship and guiding that child so that
Mm.
they can find a way to meet their basic needs, which they must, just like all of us, but in a way that is socially acceptable and will be productive for that young person throughout their lives. That's
100%.
not easy, but that's our obligation.
It is so important what you're talking about. And it reminds me of this, like that underpinning of understanding theory and providing that instead of, I see a lot of teachers that understand curriculum and teaching and they're fantastic, but without that behavior theory and not just one, like layers. And you can see the threads are different. Like I'm thinking of the social learning model and how valuable that model is when we look at increasing cooperation and minimizing or reducing coercion and conflict. I mean, it's literally a scale of different behaviors that, you know, teachers and parents can weigh. You know, are they encouraging? Do they have are they have positive involvement? Are they good at setting boundaries? You know, are they monitoring well? All of these things increase cooperation. When you understand those theories, it matters. And what is your attribution? That's a big one, right?
Yeah.
If you're calling a kid a little poop or name calling, they learn to do that. That is actually increasing conflict, but you don't know until you know the theory and you see it at play. You can almost see it. The other one I was thinking about is actually Gottman, right? And Gottman's theory of, I think it's 20 to 1. So it's very similar to the horseman. I mean, that's another really popular, I think it's more common that in relationships, but it's similar to what we're talking about. What it matters most is understanding that we're not trying to control children anymore, and that the more you force and recognize that when you're thinking about the child's behavior at a time of stress, you're actually forcing them in some way, right? So think about our own behavior. You can only control yourself.
Yeah.
And so show up in that way. And I think another big piece is when, even when that, you know, I want to just say this because right now with, you know, the repeal, the Canadian Teachers Federation and, you know, their position in this for 20 odd years or forever, I would say residential school days. That's why call to action 6 is what it is to repeal 43, is that teachers particularly really need strategies and tools to recognize and manage their environment and recognize and sense. It's almost like we want to have spidey senses of coercion. It's because that little way they move around the room under stress, you know, they slam their, you know, those are nagging behaviors. And those are coercive behaviors that some kids are extra aware of because of their history. And I like, it reminds me too, what you said, that I was just so inspired about the part where you said that children, because I learned this actually, Steve, in a school of newcomers to Canada. So these children were all new to Canada. It was a refugee corridor. 100 languages, I think, were spoken. It was more of a social service environment. And so restitution was brought in. And what you said there was you have it easier because these children are going to be more clear in their. It was incredible. That was so cool you said that. I felt that way. It was exhilarating.
You know, a couple of things when you mentioned the importance of having a theoretical framework.
Yeah.
A lot of how we see the world and react to the world is that framework. What do we think is going on here? In presenting choice theory to faculties, very often there's pushback. Someone will say, well, Steve, we don't have time for theory around here. You know, I've got lessons to plan. I've got teachers. I've got students to teach. I've got parents to meet with. I've got the great papers to grade. We don't have time for theory. And my response to that is actually one of the reasons you're so busy is you may be operating on the wrong theory. You have a theory, whether you know it or not. You have a theory, and more often than not, it's this external control theory of how to manage behavior. I don't think anybody goes to work as a teacher any day saying, I'm going to be mean to kids today. I want to lord it over them and make their life. No, they don't. They are doing what they believe is best. I need to get this kid to pay attention. I need to get her to do her homework. I need to get him to stop bothering other kids. So, and I do that in the only way I know how, which is to reward the behavior that I like and to punish the behavior that I don't. So when you don't have any other theory, when that's all you know, then in order to do your job, that's what you do. Some people are a little more effective. They can do it with a smile on their face. But what folks say is, you know, I don't have time for theory. I'm too busy. Well, if you don't have the right theory, you're going to work awful hard and create a lot of your own troubles. It's Stephen Covey who has the 7 habits of highly effective people. One of them is begin with the end in mind. And he makes a point at one point in his book of saying, you know, if you have your ladder up against the wrong wall, it doesn't matter how hard or how fast you climb, you're not going to get where you want to go.
Right.
Likewise, if you have the wrong theory about why kids do what they do and how you can influence it, you're going to work awfully hard with rewards and punishments. You're going to actually create a lot of trouble for yourself. And yes, you will be busy and you will be exhausted. I think that, frankly, is underneath a lot of the burnout that we hear about amongst
100%.
teachers.
Conflict is time consuming. If we look at how much time you spend online, how much are we talking about encouraging others? How much time our parents spent, really fostering and inspiring and amplifying their children's
Yeah,
voices? When there is behavior, when you're under stress, you will focus on that behavior. When or stress or problem, you'll go into dig into that. It becomes a cycle. And I would argue that most of society is really stuck in that problem focus. But
yeah,
that's poor intervention. If we want to actually have a more cooperative society, then we need to look at these environments where children are, especially. And I agree with theory, knowing that in the background, it saves time.
yeah.
I can't even say enough. When people are cooperative together, it is so efficient, super effective, and really fun and creative. And you can't beat it. We
Well,
cannot
you're
beat
right
time
about saving time.
cooperation.
You're right about saving time. Yeah, but I do think that one of the reasons we're losing so many teachers in the States, at least, and this was going on before the pandemic,
Yeah.
is that the application of external control, rewards and punishment,
Oh, it's
it,
exhausting.
it, it is exhausting and it pushes kids away and it destroys the only thing that we have going for us when we're
100%.
trying to inspire them to work hard, which is the quality of our relationship.
What
So
yeah.
that's, but people say, well, the other, that's another thing people, I don't have time for this, all this, relationship stuff. I've got a curriculum to cover. And I ask people to the two things that teachers will say to me if I ask them, what are the obstacles that stand between you and the kind of effective job that you would like to be able to do?
Mhm.
And the two things that most often get mentioned is misbehavior and lack of motivation.
Yeah.
And I said, well, now just imagine if you could get to a point where instead of 10% of your class being motivated and well behaved, that 90% of the class was motivated and well behaved and looking to go with you. It's like
Yeah.
pulling a wagon up the hill. There's 25 people here, 24 students and you. Well, if only 3 or 4 of you are pulling the wagon and most of the rest of them are riding and some are dragging their feet off the back, no wonder you're exhausted.
100%.
What would it be like if you could get all or almost all of those kids to be part of your solution? And wouldn't it be worth spending some time? Because once you do that, once you develop those relationships, once the kids are working hard, not because you're threatening or punishing them or rewarding them, but because they have bought into your agenda of education and challenge and personal
And they're
responsibility.
having fun.
What
They feel
they're having
powerful.
fun.
They're safe,
Exactly.
right?
Wouldn't
They
it be,
belong. Yeah.
wouldn't it be worth it to spend a little time on your own training and development and in your work with your class, particularly
Mhm.
at the beginning of the year, to
Yeah.
get to that point? To me, the answer is obvious, but
100%, Steve. You know what's exciting about what you just said, and it made me connect. So I've stood out with teachers on the picket line. I won't lie. In my years as an educational assistant, that was the beginning of my career. It's
yep,
the days that seeded everything, and I was out there and I started looking around, and what they were arguing about at that time back in the early 2000s is the same argument they have now: class size and composition.
mhm,
Right? Class size, composition, class size, composition. We need smaller classes, and we need to look at the composition, the stress on teachers, the burnout on teachers because of behavior and all of these things.
yep,
And once I started looking at this, and now I work fully in intervention, looking at these theories. Social learning model mostly is the one I focus on, and this is underneath it all. But if you think about that, when teachers are empowered with these tools, I remember, I look back now and it's almost like I want to get into the classroom, and I'm not even a teacher, right? I'm like, I really do believe that when teachers are empowered with a variety of strategies for a plethora of different scenarios, they have skills, a full toolbox. They are empowered. They feel confident that they can go in there and they could manage a class. I would go up. 40 kids can inspire each other in an environment. I know that sounds wild. I'm a bit of an out of the box thinker, but I really do believe that. The other piece that I think is important when we look at power and love is that I'm going to argue with you a little bit, because in my experience, and I know you might have a different experience with something similar, I do believe there's two kinds of teachers. And I know that there's the five kind of needs. There are most teachers that are in it because of love and belonging and fun. Like they actually, you can sense them. Their classrooms are invigorating. They are trying their best. Those are the teachers that are getting burned out because they give a shit. They are really trying their best and they love children, right? They are loving children. Then there's the other teachers that are full of power.
Mm-hmm.
And those too, because you can sense it when you walk in the room. You just have to get a sense of the learning environment. And when you know that sense, you can walk in. It's the same, teachers' classrooms where the parents are a bit, standoffish, where the kids are getting in trouble all the time, where there's more rates of misbehavior. I mean, it's an easy environment to sense. But the problem is with laws like corporal punishment being allowed in schools, when the theory that rules us is super traditional and archaic, that it's punishment and rewards, and that's the standard. That's the standard. So these teachers that are for power that really should not be in classrooms, because that affects everyone in society and these beautiful children that are trying to learn. These laws need that because it's those teachers and it's those parents that need our help the most. That's why these laws need to change. It's not because we want to punish them. It's because we have to get to those teachers that are struggling and their mindset. Either they need to learn this stuff or they need to be removed. It's that simple. Like
Well, and I won't argue with you about that, Danielle. And in any large group of people, you're going to find all kinds. And you're right. There are some people who are attracted to teaching because they get to tell other people what to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too many, but we've all encountered them.
There's enough that I think it affects kids in learning the whole school when you have a teacher like that. Like, it's important that they get worked with.
Yeah. And it's funny when I'm talking about these ideas and people talk about, well, sometimes you need to use the threat of bad grades or other punishments or to quote unquote make kids do what we know they need to be doing. I love to ask them, well, when's the last time somebody tried to coerce you to do something you really didn't want to do? Think about that for a minute and tell me, how did you respond? Did you happily do what was being demanded of you? Did you grudgingly do it because you didn't want to lose your job or you didn't want to lose the relationship, but you hated every minute of it? Were you passively aggressive? You did exactly the opposite. Well, how did you respond? And what did that do to your relationship with the person trying to coerce you? And people smile and they realize they know what it feels like to be on the dirty end of the stick of coercion, and they don't like it. And they certainly know that although they might have complied in order to get by, they certainly didn't engage in the activity at a high level of quality and in a way that was really meaningful. But for some reason, when you're on the other end of the coercion stick, when you're the one waving the stick, you're pretty sure it's going to work. And when it doesn't, you need a bigger stick.
Right.
So that's why the conversation that we're having and these ideas are developed and taught throughout his life are so important. We have, by the way, in my experience too, I try to get a whole spectrum of teachers to undergo, at least to read Dr. Glasser's books, if not to undergo formal training, including the ones that you mentioned before that just seem to have a personal knack of engaging and connecting with kids, and they don't have a problem with behavior, as well as the ones who struggle and who threaten and punish, and they're always complaining that kids are. A very interesting way to look at a school, I've done this on a few occasions, is to follow a particular child through the day. And I'm talking about a secondary school where a child might have 5 or 6 different teachers. And you just sort of follow that kid's schedule. And particularly at the middle school level, at least in my state, kids tend to move as a group. If you're together in English class, the schedule puts you together in math class and in science, whatever. So you have pretty much the same group of kids. But the interesting thing to see is the vast difference in student behavior.
As they walk into different environments.
Exactly. Wow. And the variable there, of course, is not the kids, it's the adult. And some of the adults, as you were describing, just seem to have a knack of connecting with kids, making it fun, respecting their basic needs, drawing them in, explaining why this is going to be exciting and important, and you need to learn this, and I'm here to help you. And in other classes, it's the exact opposite. So it's not always the kid. As somebody once said, if you've told a kid 1,000 times to do something and they're not doing it, it may not be the kid that's the slow learner. Anyway, there's all kinds of angles here. But maybe, I do want to mention that the Glasser Institute sponsors a number of programs. One is called the Glasser Quality School, following the title of that book that I held up a while ago, where we work with schools where not just one or two people, but the whole faculty reaches consensus that we want to craft our school in a manner consistent with these principles, and we want to learn them, we want to practice them, we want to observe and critique one another as to how well we're doing, sticking to the caring habits and avoiding the deadly habits, and try to develop that school environment over the years so that it is a joyful and powerful place for
Yeah.
people to learn and for teachers to teach. And I think that's very important. There are chapters of the Glasser Institute all over the world, including in Canada.
Yep, here in Burnaby, BC, I was part of that. So there's four elementary schools, K to 12, that were, I think, doing the whole Glasser Quality School program. It
Yeah.
was everywhere.
Well,
Yeah.
if you Google glassercanada.ca, that'll take you to the Glasser Institute for Canada, and they do a lot of the same things
Fantastic.
that
It
we do.
really is.
Yeah, you mentioned, and our conversation got started on the issue of corporal punishment, and when you think of it, corporal punishment is the ultimate expression of an external control view of the world. That I have the power and the obligation to make kids do what I know they need to do. I will do that through rewards if I can, because that's nicer. But I will resort to punishments if the rewards don't work. And if the punishments don't work, I will hit you. That's the ultimate. And it reflects a bankruptcy of understanding of human behavior, which is why having a coherent, comprehensive psychological theory of why people do what they can do is so critical. And it's sadly lacking in teacher preparation programs, at least in the United States.
And for parents too, access to programs like this. I mean, I think about, for here in Canada, for instance, the wait list to get into any parenting support program usually comes after the child's been having a diagnosis of a behavioral disorder of some kind. Maybe they're on medication or maybe not, but the parent has gone to the doctor or somebody reached out. Now they get on a wait list for a year or more. And in a child's life, the child's brain has grown so much by then. It really is entrenching these coercive cycles in families. And it's just impossible. So it's when we overturn bills around corporal punishment, we ban this, it really does give some grounding for the federal governments to then implement multi-sectoral strategies and initiatives to support teachers and parents to understand theories like the choice theory. I think it's important to talk about what you said about, and it's just a theme here today, about escalation. When we don't have strategies, what we do is we keep trying different things. And first off, that's inconsistent and unpredictable, which increases conflict. And it also makes people dysregulated, right? Especially children.
Yep.
So if they sense that the adult doesn't know what to do, or they're going to lean into coercion, the child is going to immediately become dysregulated most of the time. So having consistency, having strategies, having confidence, having that ability is super key in making sure that you can regulate a situation. So strategies are super important, but also it's about consistency. If we were going to implement, a Glasser quality school, I think one of the things that is a struggle in this conversation is if I hit a child, then the child's going to stop the behavior. Yeah. In the short term, absolutely. However, the child's going to be confused. They don't learn anything, and you're going to end up hitting them harder next time. And that's what happens when we use rewards and sanctions, is they can get out of control really quickly. They escalate, become confusing, very difficult to be consistent because our behavior doesn't rely on that. And so with strategies and with tools, with consistency, these things take time, and implementing a quality Glasser school is not something that you take lightly. That is a full commitment, and it's something that is so important that educators and parents understand that when we're breaking cycles, whether it's via school or a family, this is the hardest work of a lifetime, and it's worth a commitment, and it means a commitment. But surprisingly, children are that bright. When they sense a shift in their environment, like you said, going from one classroom to another, they're incredibly adaptable. Yeah. And so when children sense that teachers are learning and inspired about who they are, it can happen overnight for many kids. it's the hard ones that bubble up, but it's also the hard teachers as well.
You
So
know,
it's,
there's
yeah.
an interesting story that Dr. Glasser tells in one of his books. Um, he was serving in some kind of counseling or administrative capacity in a school, and he was the person that you would send a child to if they were misbehaving in your class. So
Yeah.
in comes Bobby, and one of the things that I learned from Dr. Glasser is that in the first few seconds of this kind of encounter, that's my opportunity to tell Bobby that this is not going to be the conversation you were thinking you were going to have, because the kid is walking down the hall and he's thinking, I'm in trouble now. And
Yeah.
so in, he instead of saying what the typical opening question would be, what did you do?
Right.
But
Yeah.
instead he says, Bobby, tell me your story. Tell me, it's just like a relationship kind of question. And I've used this with kids that are in schools for behaviorally challenged, even juvenile delinquent kids. You start, that's the first question. Tell me about yourself. And they got into a conversation about, what does he like to do? And he likes to go fishing with his grandfather and all this stuff that had nothing to do, or so it would seem, with the reason he was sent down there. Now, eventually we have to get around to the problem. So apparently Bobby was refusing to write in Mrs. Brown's writing class, and she got exasperated with him and sent him to the office. So he says, well, Bobby, if you went back to class, you think you could write something about going fishing with your grandfather or something like that? So the kid agrees to do that, and he goes back. The teacher catches him later in the day and says, when the kid got back to class, Mrs. Brown asked, well, what did you get? Meaning what was going to be the
What's the
punishment?
trouble?
And he
Yeah.
said, I didn't get any punishment. He just wants me to write about my grandfather. Well, the teacher catches up with him later on and says, what kind of a counselor are you? What kind of, he didn't give him a punishment. He said, no, but let me ask you a question, Ms. Brown. When he came back to your class, did he write? And the answer was yes. See, the teacher had lost track of the point here. Her initial point was, I want you to write. But then it became a power struggle. And then it became showing other kids what happens when you don't do what I tell you.
I
You get
love that story.
you come back with your tail tucked between your legs because you got punished. So she had totally forgotten why we started this conversation. So that was a fascinating little experience. In a choice theory school, and I've visited one on several occasions out in Michigan. It's the Grand Traverse Academy, which they have something called the connecting room, where instead of the suspension room, you go to the connecting room. Now, this will only make sense if you understand the theory. If you don't understand choice theory, you're going to think this is a terrible idea.
Well, it's going to be called a behavior room really quick.
Well, whatever. Yeah.
Right.
This,
Send the kid to the behavior
this is a K-12 school, so they actually have some high-flying seniors who staff the school, not the adults. They have kids volunteer to be the counselors in the connecting room. So if you have a kid that's out of control and needs to be removed because they're disrupting the class or whatever, you send them to the connecting room. Now, what goes on in the connecting room, the assumption when you walk in there is that one or more of your basic needs are out of regulation, and that's why you were, quote, misbehaving. So what the senior student does in that setting is actually try to respond to those needs, maybe play cards or talk or have fun or demonstrate some sense of belonging, some sense of power, until the point where the kid calms down and understands what they did wrong and is ready to return and function effectively.
Right.
Now, what we typically do is send them to a room where we step on their basic needs. There's going to be no belonging. There's going to be no fun here. You're powerless. Sit down. Now, if you don't understand choice theory, you would say, well, so now the kids are going to be rewarded for misbehavior. They're going to be
you hear that all the time.
But that's because that takes us back to the importance of theory. If you have an internal control understanding of why people do things and how you can repair damage and restore them to the mainstream, then you understand the value of the connecting room. If you don't understand the theory, then this won't make any sense. And that's why the theory part is so important. We have to back up, and you're right, it's time consuming because we have to all get together and talk frankly about what do we believe about why people, including ourselves, why we do what we do. And how we can what do you believe about that? How do you behave? And then and most of that will be external control because that's the world that most of us grew up with. And then you start to look at Dr. Glasser's ideas, and then if you're willing, you try some of these things out. The next time you have that problem, instead of doing what you used to do, try doing this. And hopefully you take a little step forward. It takes months or years to bring the behavior of a faculty around to a point where
Yeah.
it can work this way. These are not recipes. These are not little tricks or lesson plans.
Mhm.
This is a fundamental change in the way we think about how we and others behave.
Yeah.
It takes time. It's not easy,
It's
but it's
such
very rewarding.
It is so rewarding. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to highlight, some of the two tools that I really want to pull out that are kind of strategies. I'm all about filling up toolboxes in the short term as well. First off is that example you gave, stay focused on the goal.
Yep.
Remember that our traditional thinking can take over really quickly. And like the teacher, her goal was to have Johnny write, or Bobby. I'm not sure who your little man was.
Whoever, yeah.
Yeah, they were go to write, they weren't writing, they get sent away, they come back and they're writing. Well, right away, the punishment. What happened? Right? They forgot about the goal. It's always about the goal. Remember the goal. Recognize when your thoughts have been hijacked by some traditional, message of pain and revenge, and it becomes like, oh, am I focused on the goal? That's such a helpful tool. The other one that I think is really important is that it's always about the relationship. Always. Like that's one thing that is consistent throughout all of it. It's always about the relationship, and keep an eye on the eyes, right? When you've lost a child, you can see it. So we get so caught up in all these things, right? It's so helpful to have the theory, because you can keep your eye on the theory, but you can keep an eye on the child and your relationship, and you have the strategies to covet that. And I think like that's what's key, is because traditionally under our skin and in our bones and in our blood, we're so focused on history of punishment. And so it takes a real, it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes a relationship as being the key focus. What you're talking about are the fundamental principles of justice. Why do we behave the way we do? Do we behave this way because we are fearful of consequence? Or do we behave this way because we actually believe in the greater good? We recognize our place in the world of cooperation. And that to me gets to the root of conversation about understanding and wanting to learn more about theory. Because when we look at children and when we look at most adults, we all want to get along. We all want these same fundamental needs. And it isn't because of the fear of punishment that we're not doing that. It's because we don't have skill. We're scared. We're traumatized. We don't know how to fit back into that.
We're doing the best we can with what we know. And the point is, there's more to know.
Yeah, there's so much more to know. And I really am so grateful to talk to you today. I think you and I could talk for days. I just got this vision of excitement again about choice theory, and I'm so happy to be connected with you and to see it grow and to support it. I mean, I'm just this little person out here in Canada, but I'm reminded by this opportunity. And I think it really is an opportunity. There's lots of models out there, but I found this one, in my experience, to be simple and easy to pick up, and one that transferred well to the kids. There's all kinds of tools that the kids could understand, and it just relieved so much stress, and it was actually really fun. We did some fun activities around this. So I want to encourage any educator that's out there that's curious on how to implement, a strategy or theory, to get a hold of Steve Tracy. How did they get a hold of you, Steve?
Well, I'll just say my email address. That's the easiest way. It's Stephen, Stephen, Tracy, Tracy, and the number 7. So that's all one word. Stephen Tracy 7 at gmail.com.
Okay.
You can also go to the website of the Glasser Institute US, which is wglasser.com. That's WGLASSER.com. Or up in Canada, glassercanada.ca.
Oh, there's also a Glasser Canada.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of ways to find out about this stuff. And as I say, this is a lot more difficult to do than to say. But if you can embrace these ideas and employ them faithfully, and this allows you to break through with kids, especially the reluctant learner, especially the kid that hates to come to school or sees themselves as a failure. When you are able to light that kid's eyes up and get them to see themselves as a powerful, capable human being, as an educator, there's nothing more powerful.
And it's possible.
Yep.
It's possible. We
People
can
are doing it every day. Yep.
There's no reason that there should be any laws that protect perpetrators that use violence against children. And we can continue to spread messages of options and strategies. You're right. It is super possible, and it's super fun and exciting. I'm so grateful for you being here today, Steve. Thank you so much. And everybody out there, please do check out the Glasser Institute, learn more. There's an amazing amount of information on the went to the website, glasser.com. It was really informative. Get a hold of Steve, as well as any other model or strategy that you find effective. Share with your colleagues. Peace is possible, and there's no reason that we should be hitting kids ever. So let's ban corporal punishment, and in Canada, repeal Section 43 of our criminal code and answer call to action number 6.
Good for you. Nice to be in touch. Let's keep the conversation going.